Welcome to another episode of the Mark Moss Show. Now, these videos are taken from my recording of my radio show and podcast. I'm putting them here on YouTube for you. If you'd like to check them out on the podcast, you can just search Mark Moss Podcast. You can go to the iHeart Radio app or Apple or wherever you go and just search Mark Moss Podcast. Find it there. But I also got it here for you on YouTube as well. I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mark Moss Show, where we talk about Bitcoin, we talk about cryptocurrencies, we talk about the decentralized revolution that the world is going through right now. And there is no shortage of signposts everywhere we look to see that we are transitioning into this decentralized revolution that we're in. And so we're literally witnessing the world change right before our very eyes. Some of these things are a little more subtle, and some of them are much more apparent. And those are some of the things that I want to talk about today. We got a big show to talk about. Of course, it all comes down to the money, which of course Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are leading that revolution. But really, it's the intersection between politics, finance, and technology. It's the convergence of those three things that's the catalyst for all the change that we're seeing in the world right now. And I think if you look, if you know what you're looking for, if you're paying attention, you can see that it's not just the world that's changing. It's changing for the better, but it's also changing for the worse. It's like this is the best of times and this is the worst of times at the same time. And so, on one hand, life has never been better, right? Life expectancy is up, and we have wealth. I mean, the poorest person in the United States today is richer than the richest person in the world 100 years ago. And so we have massive wealth, massive prosperity. Things are great. We have computer phones in our pocket that can tell us anything in the world. We can do Zoom and chat with anybody from anywhere in the world instantly. We can hop on a plane and fly anywhere we want. So things have never been better. But at the same time, things are rapidly de-evolving. I recently did a talk at my live event that just happened. It was the first week of April, called Market Disruptors Live, where we have a conference. We get together and bring about 500 people together, bring about 15 different speakers from kind of different areas to talk about what's going on in the world, and more importantly, how we want to navigate through that, how we want to survive and thrive, really, as this world changes. And it was my conference. I hosted it. I had the speakers there, but I also gave a keynote presentation while I was there. And the name, or I should say the title of my presentation, was De-Evolution, Re-Evolution. And so what we're seeing is that although things have never been better, we're starting to de-evolve. Things are starting to move backwards at a very rapid rate. However, I see that there's re-evolution that will happen here shortly once we get through this transition. I know a lot of times people accuse me of being this doomsdayer because I report the news, and the news is mostly bad. And it is bad. However, one of my friends who I recently did an interview with, Tucker Max, he calls it doomer optimism. So yes, there's doom in front of us, and we're witnessing that. But there's massive hope and optimism and hope of prosperity on the other side, which I believe in. But like I said, de-evolution is here all around us, and I think it's. I was explaining to somebody in my office earlier today the implications that aren't commonly seen. And so what do I mean by that? So we're de-evolving, we're seeing the money breaking down, which of course Bitcoin is here to fix, and which is why we say Bitcoin fixes that. And by that, I mean pretty much everything. Because everything really revolves around the money. So when the money supply breaks down, everything breaks down, including society breaks down. So I want to take a look at some of that. We'll take a look at that. We'll look at some stats. I have some numbers I want to show you explaining how that's working. And I want to show you how it's affecting things that you wouldn't necessarily think of, like I said, inside society. We'll look at some of the unfortunate news that's happened this week. Unfortunately, some bad things have happened inside the United States. And believe it or not, it can be traced back to society breaking down because of the money. And then I want to talk about some statements that have come out of the World Economic Forum. They've been meeting this week over in Davos, Switzerland. The Davos man, as they're called, these are the so-called, the self-appointed elites that fly in their private jets and then want to tell us that we need to cut back on energy to save the world when they fly on their private jets. I say so-called elites. They like to call themselves elites. They're not elite. I wouldn't hire any of them to work in my business, and I doubt either of you would as well. But they are, I guess they're pretty elite at navigating through the political landscape and grifting, as we can say. So anyway, there's a couple quotes that I have prepared for you that I want to tell you, and it is shocking. And when I say shocking, I mean that they are saying the quiet part. The quiet part meaning the part that is not supposed to be spoken of, the part that we've kind of assumed, but they haven't said, but now they're saying it. And to be honest, it scares me because it's one thing if they're hiding it and lying about it, but when they come out and openly say it and try to sell it to us as a good thing, it's a problem. And let's just say they want you to be poor. And then we're going to take a look at some of the big things that are going on in the United States right now and affecting the world that the world's moving on that, again, is signs of the money breaking down, society breaking down. And it leads to lots of unintended consequences. And we'll discuss all of that and more in this big show that I have planned for you. You listen to the Mark Moss Show talking about the intersection of politics, finance, and technology. We're talking about Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and the decentralized revolution. As all three of these things converge, the world is changing. So I think it's no surprise that we have massive inflation all over the world, massive inflation. Now, what is inflation? I want to kind of break this down, this nuance for you just a little bit before we dig into this. And of course, yes, Bitcoin fixes this. So bear with me. We'll bring it all back home for you. But inflation. So you hear all over the news, inflation, 40-year highs, CPI, consumer price index, prices. In my opinion, and not just my opinion, per the Austrian School of Economics, inflation isn't prices going up. Inflation is increasing the money supply. When the money supply increases, then it results in prices going up. So prices going up are the result of inflation, of the monetary supply increasing. But for intensive purposes, most people consider inflation prices going up. So then you have consumer price inflation. That's the price of your food, your energy, your cars, things like that. And then you have asset price inflation. So assets, I don't have to tell you what those are, obviously stocks, real estate, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, et cetera. And so economists want to break those two things separately. They want to say, well, there's asset price inflation, but that's not really inflation, right? Inflation is consumer price inflation. But I think that's, I'll just call it out. I think it's stupid to try to differentiate that because let's say that asset price inflation is homes going up. So let me break this down. I spoke at a conference in January, Rebel Capitalist, my good friend George Gammon's conference, and I was there. I got to share the stage with Ron Paul, which was amazing. He started the End the Fed movement. I gave a talk titled "End the Fed" to kind of as a nod to Ron Paul. But I was also there with a well-known economist, somebody that I respect, and somebody who's super smart, smarter than he's probably forgot more than I'll ever know. Professor Richard Warner, and he is he's an academic. He is a consultant. He's one of the most influential, educated people when it comes to central bank planning, central bank policies, things like that. He gave a talk about how banks are centralizing and how we need to decentralize the banks. I'm not going to go deep into that. But he talked about how in 2008, through the great financial crash, and 2020, how all this money creation happened and it didn't cause inflation. And much respect to him. Like I said, he's probably forgotten more than I'll ever know. But I had to call him out on stage in front of everybody. And I'll tell you what he said in a second, and you'll be surprised what his response was. But it really goes back into what I'm talking about, this differentiation and how they're really gaslighting us. Now, I do want to, like I said, we're going to talk about how this inflation, these prices going up, are breaking down society, what the societal impacts of that are. And, of course, we'll bring it back to, of course, yes, Bitcoin fixes that. Now, one of the best ways to get Bitcoin, and a lot of people are asking me right now, is now a good time to get into Bitcoin? Because Bitcoin is down. It's about $30,000, $29,000 right now, which I believe is below the fair market value, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. And so a lot of people want to know, is now the right time to buy? And I would just say that, we don't know. I think it's below fair market value right now. I think it's a great opportunity to buy in. That being said, could it go down more? Well, it's possible, right? And so if you're in that camp of afraid if it goes down more, but you don't want to miss out, one of the best ways to do it is what's called dollar cost averaging. You buy a little bit now, and if it goes down, you keep buying a little bit more, and you average your cost down. One of the best ways to do that is with setting reoccurring buys or with mining Bitcoin, which is one of the fastest growing areas in the Bitcoin space. The United States has become the Bitcoin mining capital of the world. Texas has taken the lead in that. And you can also mine Bitcoin. You can buy a high-powered computer, plug it into the network. By helping process transactions and by securing the network, you earn Bitcoin back in rewards, and you can earn it every single day, which dollar cost average you in. It's not the easiest thing to do in the world, but I use a company called Compass Mining, which makes it super easy to do it. They're the world's first and largest online marketplace for Bitcoin mining. And they just released something called a Compass Score, which is a new online product to help customers make informed decisions on their next mining purchase. Just go to their website, compassmining.io. Use this Compass Score to find the score that will tell you, how much you should pay for your miner, where you should host it, and how much money you can make. They make it super easy. Just start mining your own Bitcoin today. Visit compassmining.io. Society right now is the best of times and the worst of times. It's breaking down in a lot of ways that people don't understand, and it's all related back to the money. A lot of times, people want to know, like, how do I secure my Bitcoin or whatever? What's the price going to be next week? I like to talk about why. Why do we need it? Why do we even care? What can it fix, right? So that's what we're talking about. So I was talking about how inflation, a lot of times most people, including the news and the mainstream economists, talk about inflation being prices going up. But inflation is really the money supply going up. When the money supply goes up, then prices go up. And I was on this conference, I was telling you before the break, I was at this conference with a well-known global economist. And he said that in 2008, when the central banks created all this money, it didn't cause inflation. I said, hey, excuse me, can I ask a question? I was on the panel. I said, if it didn't cause inflation, then why is real estate at all-time highs? Why is stock market at all-time highs? Why is Bitcoin at all-time highs? Why is gold at all-time highs? Why is everything at all-time highs if there was no inflation? He said, oh, well, that was asset price inflation. There was no consumer price inflation. And so my point is these economists are splitting hairs. Because, look, if I'm a consumer and I buy a home, and that home went up in value, isn't that consumer price inflation? And at the end of the day, whether it's my stocks going up, my home going up, or my steak and milk going up, it's all prices going up to me. It's more expensive to buy the stock. It's more expensive to buy the house. It's more expensive to buy my food. What difference does it make? It's kind of ridiculous. And so through the distortion of the money supply, by them arbitrarily creating more money, it creates inflation. Prices going up, right? And we know this. We can see that. But a lot of people haven't really thought through what the implications of that are. So let me give you a couple. So, for example, when prices go up, it makes things more expensive. That's a given, right? But have you thought through what that means? So a lot of times people think, the value of my home went up. Well, it didn't really go up. The value of your dollars went down, so it takes more dollars to buy those things. Did the value of your used car go up? No, it just takes more dollars to buy those things. Did the value of your steak go up? Did the value of your milk go up? No, it just takes more dollars to buy those things. But what does that mean? So I can give you an example. So for example, so gold had been money for 5,000 years, for basically all of human recent history. In 1971, we entered into an experimental phase where we got off of gold being money, and now we have this just fake arbitrary fiat money system. So we're 50 years into this experiment. So if we want to look at these numbers of what happened since this experiment started, we have to go back to 1971, or 1970 is a good measure. So in 1970, it would take 2.3 years of your life to save up for a house, the average house in the United States. Today, it takes 7 years of your life. So what does that mean? Because the central bankers have printed a bunch of money to enrich themselves and their buddies, they've literally stolen 5 years of your life, of your time. That means that's 5 years that you could have put yourself through college. That's 5 years you could have spent time with your kids, making sure your kids grew up in a good family. That's 5 years you could have spent improving yourself, your own education, to make a better life for you and your family. That's 5 years of your life that you could have spent relaxing on the beach. But instead now you have to spend that working so you can afford the average home because the central bankers created more money so they can enrich themselves. But that's easy to understand. Just the inflation in March alone, I kind of broke this down in a previous show. Just the inflation that we saw in March, 8.5%. What does that mean? Well, that means that it's about $324 more expensive for the average person to maintain their standard of living. What does that mean? So that means to have the exact same standard of living you needed the month before, it now costs you $324. So if you make $32 an hour, that means you have to work an extra 10 hours in that month just to have the exact same lifestyle that you had before. 10 hours in a month at $32 an hour. If you make $15 an hour, double it, and you can do the math from there. So if you make $15 an hour, or let's just stick with $32 an hour, it's 10 hours. So now I have to work 10 extra hours. Those 10 extra hours in a month that I could be with my kids playing, or I could be at college taking classes, or I could be starting a side business. But instead, I have to work just to have the exact same lifestyle that I had before. So what does that mean for society? Well, a couple things. So what we can see is that society has broken down. And we can see this very clearly. And I don't want to get into deep into the weeds on this, but this week we had, unfortunately, tragic news of gun violence in Texas. And so there was a shooting at a school, which is horrible. It's unthinkable. I'm a father of kids. I couldn't imagine that happening at my kid's school. But why does this happen? Now, I grew up in Texas until I was in high school. And when I was growing up as a kid in Texas, going to school, kids would bring guns to school. Like in Texas, you drove around your pickup truck with guns in the back window. And they would bring their guns to school, and after school, they'd go hunting. It happened. All the way through the 2000s, it happened. But there was no shootings. So why is there now? Well, it's because society is breaking down. Well, why is society breaking down? Well, let's go back to the money. Let's go back to the inflation. So in 1970, we saw about 40% of couples, families, had to have both people working to achieve the family dream, the American dream. Today, over 80% of families have two people working. So what does that mean? That means the families are breaking down. That means those parents, instead of one parent being home with the kids, they're both gone. Who's raising the kids? Nobody. That's a problem. If we go back to 1970, we could see that the incarceration rate, there was 200 for every 100,000 people incarcerated. Today, it's over 1,000. That's a 500% increase in the incarceration rate. What does that mean? Instead of kids growing up with their parents, mostly their dads, now they're in prison. What about the divorce rate? We can see the divorce rate has completely skyrocketed. So now instead of kids growing up with their parents, they're growing up single family. What about unwed mothers? We can see that in 1970, there was less than 5% of white kids born and 30% of black kids. Today, well, actually, as of 2008, it was the last year I got the data, that the white families went from 5 to 30%, and the black families went from 30 to 80% being born with unwed mothers. So what does that all mean? It goes back to a breakdown in society. We have obesity has skyrocketed. And yes, fixing the money can fix this. And that's why I want to show these dates and show these numbers, because you can see when we went into this monetary experiment is when things went off the rails. I'm gonna tie this all back together. I have a lot more to cover. I want to cover what they're saying out loud, that they want you to be poor and why they want you to be poor and why you should be okay with it. And then I want to bring it back to a couple stories that we saw this week that illustrate this, and it's pretty shocking for me. Now, I've been talking about how we say in Bitcoin fixes that, which means everything. And we say everything because pretty much every problem can be traced back to the money. I like to think of it like if you saw this giant oak tree, and this oak tree had, I don't know, call it 10,000 leaves, and every leaf on that tree was a problem that we had. And we could sit there and pick one leaf at a time and discuss each problem, and what about this problem, what about this problem, what about this problem. But if we trace those leaves, they go back to branches, and those branches go back to a trunk, and at the base is the root. That's the root cause. That's the root of the problem. What sits there at that root is the money. It's the money printer. It's the ability for the Federal Reserve to print money, distorting the markets, stealing your life, and causing all types of distortions. So I kind of broke down some stats of how it's breaking down society with dual incomes working, incarceration rate high, divorce rate high, unwed mothers high, obesity, health problems. So why obesity? Has it gone off the complete rails since 1970? I mean, if you go back and look at pictures of like people at the beach or walking around in shopping centers in pre-70s, everybody was fit. Everybody looked good. Why has obesity gone so high? Well, because of the money. Well, what do you mean because of the money? Well, because of everything getting more expensive, they've tried to get our food cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to offset that. And so now instead of eating good quality food like steak, like milk, like whole bread, things like that, instead we're eating stuff out of a box. We're eating processed food. We're eating fast food. And so the food system, one of my favorite economists, Safety and Amoose, he wrote the book, The Bitcoin Standard, and now the new book, The Fiat Standard. He says fiat money, fake money, fiat food, fake food. And so what we've seen is a breakdown in our food system in order to keep prices low to offset this inflation that we've seen. And all that's done is cause massive health problems. Now, the way that things work is that if I wanted to solve a problem, is I would, one, first identify a problem. And then two, I would look at what went wrong. And then I would try to fix that, right? So if I crashed my car, I would say, well, what happened? Well, you were distracted looking at your phone. Okay, well, how could we fix that? Because you've driven fine, all these years, and then you crashed your car. Well, you were looking at your phone. Okay, well, then the problem is the phone. Let's not look at that phone anymore, right? That'd be one way to do that. You'd want to look at what went wrong. And so you wouldn't just say, well, let's just not drive anymore. Like, that's probably not an answer. Let's just take away cars. I mean, that's not really an answer. Why don't we say, let's just go back and see what went wrong? And so you're looking for bright spots. And so what has gone wrong in society? Where did we go off the rails? Well, it all traces back to 1971 when we came off the gold standard. And again, I know it's a sensitive subject and I don't want to dig in too deep into it, but I just want to illustrate how the money problem, I want to illustrate the damage that the money, this fake monetary experiment has caused, because people just don't realize this. And so, unfortunately, back to, the school incident, this mass shooting that happened this week, which is historically, I mean, it's just tragic. But why is it that there was only, why is it that there was no school shootings before like 1993? So if we go back and study history from 1800 to 1960, there was basically no school shootings. There was three instances where one person just killed another person. But why is it that there was nothing for those 160 years? And why is it there was no really shootings with any frequency until 1993? What happened? It looks like kids born after 1975 is where the problems really started, and it got really worse for kids born after 1996. So what was it? What changed? Like I said, when I was a kid growing up in Texas, people drove to school with their guns. They were there. It wasn't a problem. So if we look at shootings defined as 3 or more people, we can just see how rare it was. Like I said, previous, in the 70s, we didn't see that at all, but now it seems to be happening all the time. So then we'd want to go, well, what changed? Because people always took guns to school, but what has changed since then? As a matter of fact, we can see how bad this has become. We can see that in 2017, there was 31, 2018, 30, 2019, 30, 2020, 40, 2021, 60. So that's pretty bad. We've gone from 30, 30, 30, 40, and now 60. So 2021 has doubled the numbers when we were pretty flat at 2017, 18, and 19. So what's happened since then? Well, we can look at a lot of things. So we can look at, again, back to the health problem. So because our food is so bad, we're basically sitting our kids down in the morning, feeding them bowls of sugar, and then we're sending them to school to make them sit there, and then those kids are restless. And because those kids are restless, then they get diagnosed and they get put on Ritalin, they get put on Adderall. And so now we're addicting kids to drugs from the time they're little kids and they're growing up like that. And that's just only the start of it. So these drugs that kids are taking these days have become a big problem. And I'm not going to dig super deep into the science behind that, but just go look at the data that shows what happens to people when they take these types of drugs for a long period of time. What else? Well, we've broken down all relation to truth. So today, you can be anything you want. You can be whatever sex, so there's no such thing as sexes anymore. You can be whatever you want. There's no such thing as truth. 2 plus 2 isn't 4 anymore. Math is racist, etc. And so now people have lost an anchor. They don't know where to turn. They don't have families anymore. They're eating a bunch of. They're being poisoned by their food. They're taking all types of drugs. I mean, then you add in really into the '90s where the music and the movies really started to turn. You got violence in video games, and it's not just one thing. It's all these things. We can see. I pulled up this chart from 2019 that the United States is leading the world in substance abuse. Leading the world. Now, there's also an increase in bullying, at least in reported bullying. But why is that? Well, I would imagine kids growing up without fathers or families, for that matter, probably have low self-esteem, so they're more susceptible to it. And then people with low self-esteem also want to lash out and maybe bully, right? So all these problems all boil back down to this. But SSRIs, Ritalin, lack of community, socialization, lack of church, purpose for young men, no purpose for young men, family breakdown, social media, isolation over the last 2 years, lack of social institutions, future looking bleak. Prices are so high, people can't even, kids' futures looks bleak. They don't know how they're going to be able to afford a home, things like that. And what do you think happens? What do you think happens? And so we can go back and try to look at every single symptom, but we need to get to the root of the cause. So we could certainly just, if we had a magic wand, which we don't, but imagine if we had a magic wand and we could just magically make guns illegal and just get rid of them in the United States. Well, okay, that's fine, but like in Mexico, they're illegal, but yet you still have mass shootings everywhere. So that's one problem. Second of all, it's not what's in a man's heart. In a hand, it's what's in his heart. So they could easily drive a car through a crowd. You can see across the world, there's mass stabbing incidents. As a matter of fact, there was a big one I was looking at this morning where over 30 people died in a stabbing accident. You could walk in a crowded room with a Molotov cocktail. You can go to the hardware store and get stuff to make pipe bombs. And so we need to get back to the problem. The root of the problem. And the root of the problem is the money supply. It's creating all these distortions in the market, and it just the pharmaceutical companies, etc. So anyway, hopefully that makes a case. And so Bitcoin takes away their ability to print unlimited amounts of money. It fixes that problem. And there's even bigger problems. So jumping out of that subject and into the bigger ones, which is, like I said, what these elite people at Davos are saying this week, saying the quiet part out loud, and wait until you hear what they are saying, because it's insane. And yes, Bitcoin will fix that. And now I want to talk about some of the things this week we've seen at the World Economic Forum. They've been meeting, and things have been getting bad. When I say things have been getting bad, I mean I talked about the societal problems. I talked about the inflation problems, prices getting so high. But we're at a point now where it's beyond prices just getting high. So throughout Europe and the United States, we're seeing the price of energy going up. So gas, natural gas, of course, led by oil, et cetera, which then leads to lots of other problems. So natural gas goes so high that now they can't make fertilizer. And when they can't make fertilizer, guess what? They can't make food. I mean, we're literally at that point. And the thing that's just crazy for me, I mean, it's actually very scary for me, is the transition that our leaders have gone through. So we went from a year and a half ago that it's not a problem. Inflation, prices, energy is not a problem. You think it's a problem, but it's not. Don't worry about it. Then it went to, it's transitory. It's here, but don't worry about it. We're gonna fix it really soon. To then it went like, well, actually, it's kind of a problem. We should do something about it. And now's the part where I'm really scared, because now what they're saying is that this is the plan, this is the goal. We want you to be poor, and you should be okay with it. That's what they're saying. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's talk about this for a second. So in the United States, so globally, we have a massive food problem, like a massive food problem. As a matter of fact, in the UK, they said this week that they expect it to be catastrophic. The UN is projecting hundreds of millions of people to starve to death. I mean, this is a catastrophic problem that we're having right now. I don't think it's going to be a big problem in the United States as far as like people starving to death, but it's certainly big in other parts of the world. I think a lot of people just have this U.S.-centric viewpoint, but you really need to look at the world. And that's a big problem. But in the United States, so the Russia-Ukraine war has taken about 30% of the wheat out of the global supply. But even in the United States, we're having one of the worst wheat crop in history. Now, what you may not know is that the government, again, because of the money problem, the government prints a bunch of money and does a bunch of stupid stuff with it, like paying farmers not to grow food. Imagine that. So they literally pay farmers to leave parts of their land open so they don't plant it. Now, at a time when we're running into a global food supply and even a food supply problem in the United States, wouldn't you think that we'd want to grow all the food that we can? Well, the farmers certainly think so. And the farmers went and lobbied the Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. And they said, hey, Tom, look, I know we're not planting on this part of our land, but like maybe we could, and maybe we should. We could help out. Like we need the food, right? So Tom Vilsack, he refused. He refused their request, citing, quote, a detrimental impact on, quote, efforts to mitigate climate change, end quote. He said, no, don't. I know people are starving to death. And I know we're paying you not to plant food, but you're not going to do it because, the climate. That's what he said. He went on to say, quote, our domestic agriculture industry plays a critical role in the global effort to contain temperature increases under the United States nationally determined contribution. So what does that mean? So the agriculture industry plays a critical role to contain temperatures in the United States nationally determined contribution. Let me finish the rest and I'll tell you what that means. Which is at the heart of our nation's commitment to the Paris Agreement. So President Biden, when he took office, the very first day in office, the most important thing he could do on day one was to put the United States back into the Paris Accord. All right. Now, I've done videos breaking down the Paris Accord. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Not the science behind it, but the actual agreement. So to understand this, you have to understand what he said here. So he said, in order to contain temperatures under the United States nationally determined contribution being the key word. So under the Paris Accord, each nation contributes what they're going to do. So the United States has already been the leader. The United States has cut its carbon emissions down by 30% in the last decade. The United States has. 30%, which means you pay more for everything in order for us to do that. And that's great. That's a sacrifice you've made. But other nations, China hasn't done that. India hasn't done that. So every nation contributes. What do I pledge? The United States pledged, per the Paris Agreement, to cut its emissions another 30%. Now, if you know anything, the first part's the easy part. It gets harder and harder. So how do we cut another 30%? Okay. But what did India commit to? What's their contribution? Well, they agreed not to allow emissions to go up more than the percentage of GDP. So if they can grow their GDP, they can grow their emissions. They're not cutting at all. What did China commit to? China committed that they would continue to increase their emissions through 2030. And then in 2030, they'll reverse course and lower them. So each nation's contributed. So all the other nations of the world aren't contributing any reduction. As a matter of fact, China has contributed an increase, but the United States has contributed additional reduction. And so they said, nope, you can't grow more food, even though people are going to starve to death because, the world could get a little bit warmer. So they're saying the quiet part out loud. We have Norwegian finance CEO Kirsten Brothen spoke to the World Economic Forum this week. And she said, quote, we need to accept that there will be some pain in the process. Shortages on energy, inflationary pressures. That pain is actually worth it. Because if we don't, there's no economy. You see what they're saying? They're saying, yes, okay, fine, we admit it. Prices are going to go higher. We get it. People are going to starve to death. We get it that you won't be able to drive your car anymore because it's too expensive. We get it that car companies are going to go out of business and you're going to lose your job. We get it. But she said, quote, the pain is actually worth it. Who are they to say that? control over your life. And so this is what I'm talking about, this decentralized revolution. Through this monetary system that we've had, it's increased centralization. The powers have continued to centralize and get bigger and bigger and bigger, stronger and stronger and stronger. And so while I used to have to deal with the powers in my state or maybe my country, now it's global. Now these people are meeting at the World Economic Forum, flying there in their private jets, creating more carbon emission in one plane flight than you probably will in your whole year. And they're going to tell you that you need to feel more pain. You need to lose your job and you need to starve because the pain is actually worth it. Well, I don't think so. I don't think the pain is actually worth it. I don't think we need to go backwards at all. And we'll talk about that more later. But basically what we're seeing is that this centralization of power, we're at peak centralization. And so we have these three-letter organizations like the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization and the World Trade Organization and the UN and the IMF and everything telling you what you can and can't do, what you can and can't eat, or even if you can and can't have food. But as I talk about each and every week, we're witnessing the decentralized revolution. Money, controlling the money supply has enabled them to grow bigger, and Bitcoin will take away their ability to do that, which will then decentralize the world and allow us to take back control of our own very lives. Sovereign, directing my life as I see fit in the direction that leads to my own ends. That's the goal. And that's what Bitcoin is here to fix. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that episode that was taken from the Mark Moss radio show and podcast. Now, you can check them out on the podcast app. Just go to iHeart Radio's app or search iTunes or wherever you go. Just search Mark Moss Podcast. You can find them. I also have a couple short segments taken from other episodes. You can find them linked up above in the video feed. I hope you enjoy them.